He was a battle-worn veteran, carrying the grief of losing his wife. His only daughter was drifting away, their home sinking deeper into silence and misunderstanding. One evening, on his way home, Ethan found a box holding 3 trembling shepherd puppies. He almost walked past, but the image of abandoned children he once saw in war-torn villages stopped him. He couldn't leave them behind. Bringing them home, he had no idea his hopeless life was about to turn a new page. Would these tiny pups push his family to the edge, or become the healing they desperately needed? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. The rain fell in thin, icy threads over the quiet mountain road, turning the evening into a dim watercolor of headlights, fog, and trembling shadows. Ethan Clark gripped the steering wheel with the weariness of a man who had carried too much for too long. At 46, he still had the broad shoulders and sharp jawline of a soldier, though the years had carved deep grooves around his eyes. His beard, once neatly trimmed, had grown uneven, salt and pepper like the first frost of winter on steel. His brown eyes, once fierce, steady, had dulled into the gaze of someone who had learned to endure silence more than speak through it. He had been a decorated veteran, a man known among his platoon for quiet decisiveness and unshakable loyalty. But the death of his wife 2 years earlier had hollowed him out, leaving a quieter, more brittle version of the man he used to be. He loved fiercely now, protectively, desperately, and that was exactly why his 16-year-old daughter Lily had begun pulling away from him like a tide slipping from shore. Lily was slender, long-legged, with waves of dark hair that brushed her shoulders and eyes, the deep hazel of her late mother. She had inherited her mother's softness and Ethan's stubbornness, a combination beautiful in spirit but combustible in grief. Since her mother's passing, Lily felt every boundary Ethan set like a shackle. She interpreted his fear as restriction, his trembling protectiveness as control. The house they shared had become a landscape of closed doors and conversations that echoed with things left unsaid. Ethan felt the distance widening but didn't know how to close it without breaking her trust further. He feared losing her more than anything, yet every attempt to protect her only seemed to push her further away. As he drove through the storm that night, his thoughts were heavy. His chest tightened with a mixture of regret and longing, a wish to rewind time, to love his daughter in a way that didn't suffocate her, a wish to be the man he once was before grief rewrote him. That was when he saw it, a small, waterlogged cardboard box sitting crookedly by the edge of the road, illuminated only by the brief sweep of his headlights. Something inside moved. Ethan braked instinctively, the truck sliding slightly on the wet pavement. His pulse thudded. Years of military training snapped awake beneath his fatigue, the instinct to help, to respond, to save. He stepped out into the rain, the cold immediately biting into his coat. The wind pushed at him like an impatient hand. The box gave a faint rustle. Ethan crouched, lifting the softened cardboard flap with calloused fingers. 3 shepherd puppies, no more than 6 weeks old, huddled together in a trembling knot of fur and frightened whimpers. One had a patch of white along its muzzle, eyes bright and alert despite the cold. Another was darker, almost black, with floppy ears and a timid gaze. The third was the smallest, sandy-colored, its ribs faintly visible beneath its wet fur, yet its eyes held a fierce spark as if daring the world not to give up on it. Around their tiny bodies rose the faint smell of damp straw and fear. A note, scribbled in uneven handwriting, lay half-soaked on top. Please give them a home. The rain had blurred half the letters, but the plea remained unmistakable. Ethan's throat tightened. There was a moment, a strange, suspended breath, where the world seemed to hush around him. 3 small, abandoned lives looked up at him, shivering, uncertain, waiting. Something in his chest cracked open. Gently, he scooped them up, pressing their soaked bodies against the warmth of his coat. The smallest one whimpered, pawing weakly at his collar as if anchoring itself to him. "It's all right," Ethan murmured, voice roughened by emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I've got you. I won't leave you out here." As he carried them to the truck, he felt something shift. Imperceptible, but powerful. He didn't know why, but the weight of the puppies in his arms felt like the first heartbeat of change, a quiet rearranging of fate. A moment where grief loosened its grip just enough for something new, something warm, alive, and unexpected to slip in. When he sat behind the wheel, the 3 pups curled into his lap, their tiny bodies rising and falling in quick breaths. Ethan glanced at them, and for the first time in months, his chest loosened. Maybe the universe hadn't abandoned him after all. Maybe it had left a small box on the roadside as a reminder that even broken things still found their way home. And he didn't yet know it, but the moment he lifted those 3 trembling lives from the rain was the moment his own life, and Lily's, quietly, irrevocably, began to change. The dawn broke pale and hesitant over the Clark home, the kind of morning light that seeped gently through fog rather than pierced it. The house, usually silent at this hour, carried new sounds, soft whimpers, tiny paws shifting against blankets, and the faint rumble of 3 small lives adjusting to warmth for the first time. Lily Clark stood in the doorway of the living room, her hair still messy from sleep, long dark waves cascading over the shoulders of her oversized hoodie. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, held a mixture of irritation from last night's argument, curiosity about the newcomers, and something softer she fought to hide. 16 was a delicate age, and Lily carried her grief like a shell around her ribs, brittle and sharp. Yet, as she watched the 3 puppies huddled in the nest of towels Ethan had laid out, the anger she had held onto loosened just a little. Rust, the largest of the 3, was the first to notice her. His fur was a warm caramel brown with a splash of white across his muzzle, and he carried himself with a kind of babyish arrogance, like he believed the room belonged to him. He gave a low grumble when he shifted, clearly offended that the towel beneath him had wrinkled. Maple, smaller, with darker fur almost bordering on black, was timidly licking droplets of milk from her nose. She had delicate paws, round dark eyes, and a gentle expression that reminded Lily uncomfortably of her own vulnerability. Echo, the smallest, sandy-colored with bright, piercing eyes, sat upright despite his size. There was something defiant about him, something fiercely alive. He tilted his head toward Lily as if reading the unspoken tremor in her chest, her heartache, her loneliness, her fear of being misunderstood. Ethan entered from the kitchen then, his hair still damp from a rushed shower and his clothes smelling faintly of motor oil. He carried 3 small bowls, moving with the careful steadiness of a man terrified of making mistakes. "They're probably hungry again," he said gently. It wasn't just a statement. It was an olive branch. Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening nervously around the sleeves of her hoodie. Before she could respond, Maple let out a sharp bark when she noticed the milk in Ethan's hand, startling herself and everyone else. Echo chimed in with a high-pitched squeak as if scolding Maple for being dramatic. Rust naturally grumbled in complaint that the bowls were not placed down quickly enough. Ethan chuckled under his breath, a rare, warm sound Lily hadn't heard in months. Something in her chest flickered at the sound, fragile and fleeting. When Ethan set the bowls down, Rust dove forward, Maple sniffed delicately, and Echo simply stared between the bowl and Lily, as if waiting for her permission to eat. She stepped closer. "Go on, little guy," she whispered. Echo obeyed instantly. The moment caught Ethan by surprise. His eyes softened. "Looks like he likes you." Lily shrugged, trying to hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "Don't get your hopes up." But her voice lacked its usual sharpness. The morning drifted forward with a strange new rhythm. Rust growled every time his towel shifted, prompting Lily to fetch another blanket. Maple, shivering slightly, whined whenever the milk cooled, sending Ethan back to the kitchen to warm it. Echo stayed close to Lily, watching every expression on her face with a peculiar attentiveness, ears perking when she sighed, tilting his head when she frowned. These weren't random puppy noises, they were reactions, mirrors, answers. As the hours passed, the house transformed. The silence that had once felt thick enough to choke on now trembled with tiny protests, playful yelps, and the soft patter of paws. The air felt warmer, lighter. Ethan noticed Lily laugh, quietly, timidly, when Rust toppled into a pillow. He noticed her kneel down to tuck Maple into a softer blanket. He noticed her eyes soften every time Echo pressed against her leg for reassurance, and Lily noticed her father noticing. She wasn't ready to forgive everything, not yet, but for the first time, there was no wall between them, no heavy silence filling the space where love used to live. Instead, there were 3 small bridges, each with wagging tails. Later that afternoon, as Ethan prepared fresh milk, Lily leaned against the counter beside him. The air still smelled like rain. "We should set up a place for them in my room," she said casually. Ethan turned, startled by her tone, open, even inviting. "If you want," he replied, careful not to let hope show too brightly on his face. She glanced down the hallway where the puppy's tiny sounds echoed. "They shouldn't sleep alone tonight." She didn't say I shouldn't either, but Echo's small whine in the next room seemed to say it for her. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt the smallest flicker of something return to the house. Not joy, not peace, but the beginning of both. And as Rust grumbled, Maple barked for warm milk again, and Echo nudged Lily's ankle as if claiming her. Ethan knew the truth. 3 small voices had begun to heal what grief had broken. The afternoon sun filtered through thin clouds, casting warm, muted light over the Clark home, a house that had begun, slowly, quietly, to sound alive again. It was the kind of light that softened wooden floors and made dust motes drift like tiny lanterns. Inside, the air buzzed with small movements, the shuffle of paws, faint sniffs, and the restless energy of 3 shepherd pups exploring every corner like explorers reclaiming abandoned land. Rust, Maple, and Echo had been in the house less than 48 hours, yet they behaved as though they had always belonged. And perhaps, in some unspoken way, they had. Ethan stood near the front door, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He looked more rested today, though the heaviness around his eyes remained, a reminder of the years spent fighting grief alone. Beside him, Lily knelt on the floor, her long dark hair falling in a curtain as she tried for the 10th time to convince Echo to stop chewing the leg of the coffee table. Echo, of course, ignored her. His sandy fur glowed under the warm light, and his sharp, curious eyes sparkled with a mischief that promised trouble. Maple hovered nearby, dainty and shy, flinching at sudden sounds but always leaning closer to Lily with a timid trust. Rust lay sprawled on the rug, his caramel fur puffed with superiority as if he had appointed himself the eldest brother overseeing the chaos. A knock sounded at the door, firm, steady, professional. Ethan opened it to reveal Dr. Charles Ellison, the local veterinarian. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and angular, with thinning gray hair combed neatly to the side. His face carried the sharp edges of someone who had lived a disciplined life. Yet his eyes, pale blue and perceptive, softened when he smiled. A thin scar traced along his chin, the result of a horse kick incident years earlier, which he often joked had knocked sense into him. Dr. Ellison had a calm, patient way of speaking, the kind that made frightened animals settle down and stubborn farmers listen. "Heard you rescued a trio of troublemakers," he said with a gentle grin. His deep voice carried warmth, the kind earned from decades of tending to creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Ethan stepped aside to let him in. "Trouble is one word for it." Dr. Ellison knelt slowly, his knees cracking. The pups regarded him with curiosity, Rust sniffing boldly, Maple hiding halfway behind Lily, and Echo tilting his head like a philosopher contemplating the stranger's soul. Dr. Ellison examined each pup with practiced movements. He checked their ears, paws, gums, and heartbeat. His expression shifted from interest to surprise. "Well now," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "These three, they're unusual." Ethan frowned. "Unusual how?" The veterinarian paused thoughtfully before speaking. "They have synchronized emotional responses, rare in such young pups." He tapped Echo lightly on the forehead with 2 fingers. "When you tense up, this one stiffens. When Lily relaxes, Maple loosens. Rust copies your tone of voice." Lily blinked. "Like mirrors?" "Exactly," Ellison said. "Tiny, furry mirrors. It's not common, but it does happen, especially in pups who've experienced early abandonment. They latch on to emotional cues for survival." He sat back, brushing his hands. "They're not just reacting. They're understanding." Before Ethan or Lily could respond, an unexpected noise rang out. "Ding!" All three froze. Maple jumped. Rust barked once. Echo stared at the source, a small copper bell hanging crookedly near the back door. Lily turned to Ethan. "Did you put that there?" Ethan scratched the back of his neck. "Found it in the drawer yesterday. Thought it might be useful, for training." "Or for chaos," Ellison chuckled. Then, as if the universe wished to prove his point, Rust marched toward the bell and hit it again with his paw. Ding, ding, ding. 3 rings, Lily said slowly. "What does that mean?" "Dinner," Rust barked sharply as if agreeing. Maple ran in circles. Echo squeaked impatiently. Ethan raised his eyebrows. "No way, that's coincidence." But it wasn't, because when Ethan brought out a bowl of softened kibble, Rust hit the bell 3 more times, proud, demanding. The next test happened 10 minutes later. Maple wandered to the bell, looked at the closed patio door, and rang, ding. Ding. Exactly 2 chimes. "She wants out," Lily whispered, and she was right. Later that afternoon, Echo sat near the armchair Ethan used most often, his heavy, worn leather chair, and rang a single clear ding before nudging the chair's leg. Lily burst out laughing. "He wants you to move it." The house filled with laughter, genuine, unguarded. It felt strange but wonderful, like remembering a language they had forgotten. Over the next hours, the bell became the household's newest form of communication. 3 rings meant hunger. 2 rings meant a door needed opening. 1 ring meant something in the house required the Ethan adjustment. Usually a blanket, a pillow, or the position of his chair. The pups had discovered their voice, and strangely, it was the bell that helped Ethan and Lily rediscover theirs. As evening settled, the house no longer felt like a museum of grief, but a living, breathing home. Lily leaned against Ethan's shoulder, tired but smiling. Echo curled in her lap. Rust and Maple slept nearby, their tiny chests rising and falling. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his daughter's hair. Lily didn't move away. The bell rested silently, but its presence lingered like a promise. 3 small souls had found their way into a broken home, and with each ring, they stitched something back together. The morning sky over the Clark home stretched wide and pale, brushed with soft streaks of pink and silver, as if the world itself were exhaling after a long night. Inside, the house hummed with its now familiar orchestra of sound, Rust's throaty mumbling, Maple's dainty paw steps, and Echo's bright, questioning chirrups echoing through the hallway. Ethan, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, listened to the small symphony with a quiet satisfaction he had forgotten how to feel. He looked more alive than before, still rugged and worn with deep lines carved by years of hardship, but there was now a gentleness softening the corners of his mouth, a rare spark returning to his brown eyes. Lily shuffled in moments later, hair pulled into a messy bun, hoodie half-zipped. She carried Maple in her arms like a small shadow, and Echo trotted close behind as if guarding her from invisible storms. Rust, the self-appointed ruler of the living room, lay stretched across the rug like an emperor. As Lily opened her mouth to say something, a greeting maybe, or a request to warm the milk for Maple, a knock sounded at the door. Not sharp, not hurried, soft, hesitant. Ethan opened it and froze. Standing on the porch was Sophie Mulligan, the elderly neighbor from 2 houses down. Sophie was in her early 70s, short and round-shouldered, with fine white hair gathered in a loose bun. Her skin was pale and translucent like delicate paper, and her blue eyes, though kind, carried a quiet exhaustion. She wore an old wool coat buttoned unevenly, as if she had dressed without thinking. Sophie had lived alone since losing her adult son, Daniel, a soldier who never returned from deployment. His death had turned her once cheerful voice into a hushed murmur and made her house a monument of loneliness. Ethan's expression softened instantly. He knew grief, knew its weight, its bite, its silent nights. "Morning, Sophie," he said gently. "Everything all right?" Sophie hesitated before answering, her hands twisting the frayed ends of her gloves. "I heard barking yesterday. Happy barking. I thought maybe I'd come say hello." The moment she stepped inside, something remarkable happened. The 3 pups reacted before any human did. Rust, typically the slowest to move, leapt to his feet with a decisive bark and trotted toward the old woman. Maple, timid little creature that she was, followed close behind, tail tucked but nose twitching. Echo approached last, cautious yet curious, his bright eyes studying her trembling hands. Sophie blinked down at them, startled and visibly touched. "Goodness, they're beautiful," she whispered. Rust pressed his head against her shin. Maple sat directly on her foot. Echo gently nudged her hand as if to ask, "Are you hurting? Do you need us?" Something inside Sophie cracked. Softly, quietly. Her shoulders trembled and her breath caught. Ethan saw it. Lily saw it. The pups felt it. Sophie knelt slowly, her joints stiff, and the moment her knees touched the rug, Maple crawled into her lap as though she had been waiting her entire short life for this specific person to arrive. Rust circled her twice, then settled beside her like a loyal guard. Echo rested his chin on her knee. Sophie lifted her hand to her mouth. I don't know why they're doing this," she stammered, voice cracking. Lily knelt beside her. "They know," she said softly. "They always know." Ethan looked away for a moment, blinking the sting from his eyes. From that morning forward, Sophie became a daily presence in their home. She began arriving just after breakfast, her steps slow but purposeful. She brought fresh bread, old stories, and a quiet bravery that came from surviving life's hardest blows. The pups responded to her in ways no one could fully explain. Rust, with his caramel fur and bossy demeanor, lay across Sophie's feet every time she sat down, grounding her like a warm, breathing weight against the cold loneliness she carried. Maple, soft and bashful, placed her head on Sophie's thigh during moments of silence. Moments when Sophie seemed lost in memories of Daniel, her son with sandy hair and a laugh she said she could no longer recall clearly. Echo, perceptive and fierce despite his size, touched her hand with his nose whenever her eyes grew glassy. Sometimes he sat upright at her side, chest puffed as if defending her from grief itself. And slowly, the house changed again. The walls that once absorbed grief began to reflect voices. Old stories from Sophie about Daniel's childhood mischief, gentle teasing between Ethan and Lily, the chaotic chorus of barks and bells. Lily found herself sitting closer to Ethan during these afternoons, both of them listening as Sophie recalled the way Daniel used to leave muddy footprints across her kitchen floor, or how he never learned to fold laundry properly. One evening, as Sophie laughed, a sound light and airy, so different from the pained whisper she had carried for years, Lily whispered, "It feels like she was meant to come here." Ethan looked at his daughter, a quiet understanding passing between them. Maybe we all were. For the first time since his wife's death, Ethan felt the house become a home again. Not through force, not through discipline, but through connection, through shared wounds, through the healing presence of three tiny creatures who didn't know how to speak, but somehow said everything. And as the sun set that night, casting warm orange light across the living room where Sophie dozed with Maple curled on her lap, Rust snoring at her feet, and Echo watching over them all, Ethan realized that these three pups weren't just saving Sophie. They were saving him, saving Lily, saving everything he feared was lost forever. The storm came without mercy, rolling over the mountains like a dark, rumbling tide. Rain slashed sideways across the windows of the Clark home, turning the world beyond into a blur of shadows and trembling lights. The wind howled against the siding, scraping along the corners of the house like something desperate trying to claw its way inside. Inside, Ethan sensed the tension long before he heard the door slam. Lily had been quiet all day, her shoulders tight, her voice clipped. Grief was a thing that lived in her bones, but anger was the fire she used to protect it. When Ethan told her she couldn't go to a late-night gathering because of the approaching storm, she snapped. "You don't trust me," she had shouted, eyes glistening. "You never have." Ethan, rugged and exhausted, his beard damp with sweat from fixing a broken heater earlier, tried to explain. His voice broke through the rattling windows, but not through her hurt. Then came the sound, the final sharp slam of the door, followed by Maple's frantic paws skittering after her. Ethan froze, his chest clenched. Rain hammered the porch as Lily and the little dark-furred Maple disappeared into the storm. Maple was barely 2 months old, slender, with dark expressive eyes and soft, silky ears that twitched at every shift of emotion. She was timid but fiercely loyal, especially to Lily, as if sensing the quiet ache in the girl's heart. Now Maple's high, frightened yips faded into the distance. Ethan grabbed his coat, his thick frame trembling not from fear of the storm, but from fear of losing his daughter. His combat years had carved harsh instincts into him, but nothing, not even the battlefield, terrified him more than the thought of Lily alone in the dark. Thunder cracked, and then Rust barked, a deep, commanding bark full of urgency. Echo answered with a sharp chirrup, pacing in frantic circles by the door. The two pups looked at Ethan with bright, alert eyes that seemed to say, "Come on, hurry." Rust, the caramel-coated pup with the bold posture of a natural leader, shoved the door with his head. Echo, sandy-colored and intuitive, barked toward the storm as if pointing toward Lily's path. Ethan threw open the door. The cold hit him like a wall. In the flickering lightning he saw nothing but swirling rain. But Rust and Echo didn't hesitate. They shot into the storm like streaks of living light. Ethan ran after them. He was older now, his joints aching from years of service, but adrenaline surged through him. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, soaked through his jacket, and made the earth slick beneath his boots. He could barely see, but the two pups ahead glowed like hope itself, bounding through mud and darkness. Suddenly, Maple's cry cut through the storm, sharp, terrified. Ethan's heart lurched. He followed the sound, lungs burning. Rust veered left, Echo close behind. Ethan crashed through a curtain of wet branches and skidded to a stop. There, down a small rocky slope, he saw her. Lily was curled against the cold ground, her hoodie soaked, her hair tangled with leaves and rain. She shivered violently, one knee scraped raw from the fall. Maple stood over her, barking desperately into the storm, her small body trembling but unyielding. "Lily!" Ethan slid down the slope, nearly falling, and reached her in 2 strides. She looked up through wet lashes, fear and sorrow swirling in her hazel eyes. "Dad, I slipped." Her voice cracked. Ethan gathered her into his arms, his rough, calloused hands trembling as he pressed her against his chest. The storm roared around them, but for a moment all Ethan heard was her heartbeat. "I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not losing you." Lily clung to him, sobs shaking her shoulders. Echo pressed against her legs, whining softly. Rust stood guard, his growing body blocking the cold wind as best he could, tail tucked but eyes determined. Maple yipped again, but the sound was different now. Relief, not fear. Lily lifted her face into her father's chest, tears mixing with rain. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean to run. I felt like you didn't trust me, like you were scared of everything I did." Ethan closed his eyes. His voice was raw when he answered. "I am scared, but not of you. Of losing you. You're all I have left." The storm softened around them as if listening. Lily swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the fabric of his coat. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought you were just holding me back." "I was trying to hold on," he said. Maple nudged Lily's hand. Echo pressed his head against Ethan's boot. Rust gave a single low bark, as if commanding the world to stop being cruel. And somehow, in that violent storm, 3 small pups stitched together a broken bond with their tiny paws and enormous hearts. Ethan carried Lily home, all 3 pups trailing close, staying within arm's reach as if escorting precious cargo. Inside, wrapped in blankets, Lily leaned against Ethan on the couch. Maple curled on her lap, eyes half closed. Echo kept watch from her feet, and Rust lay proudly across Ethan's boots. The storm raged outside, but inside, something fragile and long lost bloomed again. Trust. Love. Family. That night, for the first time in years, the Clark home wasn't haunted by absence. It was filled with warmth, quiet laughter, and the gentle breaths of 3 little shepherds who had arrived just in time to save them. In the quiet that follows every storm, there comes a moment when we finally see what was invisible all along. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a miracle of thunder or a grand sign from the heavens. Sometimes it comes softly, carried on small paws, in the steady loyalty of creatures who love without words. And perhaps that too is a gift from God, the gentle way He places the right souls on our path at the exact moment our hearts threaten to break. In this family's darkest hour, 3 tiny shepherds became living proof that grace often appears in forms we least expect. A reminder that God works through the humble, the bruised, the abandoned, and through everyday moments that seem too small to matter until they save us. If this story touched something in you, take it as a quiet encouragement to open your heart a little wider today, to notice the small mercies, to believe once more that light can return even after years of shadow. And if you carry your own wounds, may you find comfort in knowing that no one heals alone. God sees you, God hears you, and may He bless every step you take forward. If you felt the warmth of this journey, share this story so it may reach someone who needs a reminder that hope still walks among us. Leave a comment, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive. May God bless you and all those you love, today and always.